Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And this is our first recording since getting back from True Crime Podcast Festival. It was a blast meeting some of our listeners as well as making friends with so many other great podcasts. Today, we'll be discussing the case of two young lovers who went missing while making their way to a Woodstock-like concert in upstate New York. When the two failed to return, both families became frantic, and authorities were quickly notified. But unfortunately, nearly just as quickly, investigators proved themselves to be little to no assistance. After some time, family and friends alike, knowing that something was wrong, began to take things into their own hands, hoping they may find answers. Today's case is about the disappearance of Mitchel Weiser and Bonita Bickwit. Mitchel Weiser was born on November 23, 1956, to parents Sydney and Shirley. He came from a normal middle-class Jewish family and had been living with his parents and sister Susan on East 8th Street in Midwood, New York, which is a neighborhood within Brooklyn. In 1973, when our story begins, he was attending John Dewey High School and was said to be getting ready to graduate the following year in 1974. Now, John Dewey High School was not your typical high school, at least back in the 70s. It was actually what's been described as an alternative school for gifted or very high-achieving students. Just reading through the website for the school today, you can tell that they take pride in their education of their students. The school's mission statement as of 2022 is, quote, "All children can learn and be successful when held to high expectations and given appropriate supports and interventions that are designed to meet their individual needs." End quote. Mitchel was said to be incredibly bright and was an honors student. He's also been described by his loved ones as brave and very honest. But while Mitchel was attending John Dewey High School, he met his future girlfriend, Bonita. Bonita Bickwit, better known as Bonnie, was born on January 28, 1958. She lived in Borough Park, New York with her mother Ray, father Theodore, and sister Cheryl. Bonnie also came from a normal middle-class Jewish family and had a pretty ordinary upbringing. Since the couple both met at this high school for intelligent and hardworking teens, you can imagine Bonnie, too, had been described as very smart and was also an honors student. She had also been described by loved ones as good-natured and friendly. Rather quickly, a romance blossomed between Bonnie and Mitchel, and the pair became pretty much inseparable. Their bond grew over the year or so that they were dating, and they spent a ton of time together, specifically after school, when, they had free time. A statement regarding the couple's relationship and time spent together in the Charlotte Observer says, quote, "Last year was a party year. Every weekend there was another Sweet 16. They were always going to parties together. They were very happy together." End quote. They were super popular too and made friends with everyone, and those who attended school with them or were just friends with them in general seemed to have nothing but wonderful things to say about the couple. Now, by the summer of 1973, the pair had been dating for over a year, with Mitchel being 16 years old at the time and Bonnie was 15. And unlike that last comment from the Charlotte Observer, this summer, the summer of 73, seemed as though it was going to be a bit different for the two. You see, they had each gotten some sort of job or internship for the summer. Mitchel was very into photography, and he'd landed an internship with Chelsea Photographers located in either Brooklyn or Coney Island, New York. I'm not sure which is more accurate, but he'd be working the summer there as a photographer's assistant. Bonnie, on the other hand, was going to be working as what's been described as a mother's helper, or in layman's terms, a babysitter, for a family at a place known as Camp Wellmet, which was located in what I believe to be Narrowsburg, New York, or somewhere close to that specific town. There was a segment done with MSNBC that covered this case, but in that video, it's mentioned that Camp Wellmet was located in the Catskills, but the distance between Catskill, New York, and Narrowsburg, where I do think the camp was, is really far, so I'm really not totally positive on exactly where it was, but Narrowsburg has been reported probably the most, so I'm gonna go with that. It also seems as though Bonnie was living at the camp over the summer because it was over 100 miles or a 2.5-hour drive from her home in Borough Park. So I think this was a summer camp, like sleepover camp type thing.
Have you ever heard of a babysitter called a mother's helper?
I have, yes, actually.
Really?
Yes.
I've never heard that before in my life.
Yeah, I think it's more along the lines of you're there to assist the mom.
I was thinking like a wet nurse.
Oh,
when
that's
you said mother's
not
helper.
at all. That is not at all what went through my head. No, I think it's more along the lines of like you're helping with the kids while she's like still getting stuff done around the house, and it's not like both parents are at work. I could be totally wrong, but that's what I envision.
What's that thing called? It's like always like a French lady that comes and lives in your house.
An au pair?
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of like an au pair.
I mean, maybe, probably like similar to it, so. But anyway, before we even dive into the timeline of events, I do just want to mention that this case was very underreported in the early days, and roughly 7 months passed before there was any real news coverage on it, like at all. So a lot of this information came out slowly over time. And when I say over time, I mean over a lot of time. But I've pieced together the flow of the story and when things came out as best I can, but you're not going to be getting all the info as you usually do in like perfectly chronologically released order, because I'll tell you that was way too confusing to do on this case. It's still chronological, but you know what I mean. So let me give a little bit of context before we cover the timeline. On Saturday, July 28th, 1973, there was an event taking place in a town known as Watkins Glen, New York. And that event was this massive concert where over 600,000 to potentially even 800,000 individuals would be in attendance. The concert was called Summer Jam, and bands like the Allman Brothers, The Band, and the Grateful Dead were going to be performing. It was marketed as the next Woodstock, and truly seemed like it was going to be quite the event.
Summer Jam now, I think, is like rap and hip-hop, isn't it?
I have absolutely no idea.
You've never heard of Summer Jam?
I mean, I've heard of it, but I don't know what it entails.
At least I could be totally wrong in thinking that, but I feel like I used to hear commercials about it on like Jammin' 94.5.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Summer Jam, come see, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I see what you're saying. Mitchell seemed super excited for this concert, and he'd bought tickets to attend Summer Jam with one of his buddies from school, Larry. From what I can tell, Mitchell had the time off from his photography internship and planned to travel up to Watkins Glen from his home in Brooklyn with his friend. However, the distance from Brooklyn, where Mitchell lived with his family, to Watkins Glen was like ridiculously far, almost 250 miles far. I don't know what the original travel plans were regarding how they were going to get there, but a wrench got thrown into whatever they were when Larry's mother told him there was no way in hell he was going to this festival or concert or whatever you want to call it. So now that Larry was not allowed to attend, there was this extra ticket available. Well, Mitchell decided he'd invite Bonnie, and the two would travel together up to Watkins Glen for a fun, music-filled weekend. From what I've gathered, though, it seems as though Mitchell's family wasn't overly thrilled with his decision to go to this concert in the first place, but they ultimately obliged because it seemed like he was pretty dead set on wanting to go, and he didn't seem like he was going to take no for an answer.
If something's slated to be the next Woodstock,
yeah,
you know there's going to be drug use there, you know, like the Grateful Dead, you had the Deadheads, the roadies that would like follow them around everywhere. So I can understand why parents wouldn't want their 16 and 15-year-olds going to this.
Yes, and what I read about Larry, too, he was like, my mom had a full-blown flip out. She was like, hell no, you are not going to this thing. And I could totally see your mom being like, there's no fucking way you're doing that.
Absolutely.
So with that, let's kind of dive into the timeline of Thursday, July 26th, 1973, through the weekend into early the following week, which kind of goes into July 31st. First of all, I had mentioned before that the distance from Brooklyn to Watkins Glen was roughly 250 miles or a 4.5-hour drive, which is a long way to travel as a young teen in the early 70s, especially if you didn't have a car or driver's license, which neither of them did. Mitchell was actually supposed to be taking his driver's test a few weeks after this concert, and he was really excited about it. But at this point, without a license, he and Bonnie would have to find other means of travel. And now that plans had changed, Mitchell decided he was going to make the trip to Camp Wilmette, where Bonnie was working, so the two could then hitchhike together to get to Summer Jam from the camp instead of from his home. The distance between Camp Wilmette and Watkins Glen was a little more reasonable, around 140 miles. Still, though, that's well over 2 hours, honestly almost 3 hours of driving. But either way, Mitchel was getting ready to leave his home in the afternoon or early evening hours of July 26, 1973, after he'd spent the day working at Chelsea Photographers. It's reported that he had about $25 on him, which would amount to about $167 in today's money. But his mom had wanted to give him more, just in case. He was going to be away for a few days. I can understand that. But I guess he'd hurried out of the house before she was able to actually hand him more money. I've seen it reported that Mitchel took either a bus or a taxi to get to Camp Wilmette to meet up with Bonnie, but I don't know which is more accurate. I do know that he actually ended up spending the full $25 he had on him by the time he reached the camp, so I kind of think he might have traveled by taxi due to the cost. I don't think a bus would cost that much back in the day, but what do I know?
No, that makes sense. I mean, bus pass even nowadays you can get on for like $1.
Yeah, it's like dirt cheap. So I'm like, he had to have taken a taxi. You would have to think today, like if we took an Uber somewhere, it would be a lot of money for a long distance.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
But it's stated that Mitchel arrived at Camp Wilmette around midnight, so now July 27th, and at some point he called his sister to let her know he'd arrived there and that he used all his money on transportation. According to an MSNBC segment on this case, which I do actually want to shout out someone named Harold Kramer on YouTube for uploading this, because it's legit the only video news coverage I can find online, but it had tons of good information in it about this case and was very helpful for piecing things together. Oh, and mind you, this segment didn't come out until way later, but the timeline of events was so confusing with the lack of news coverage for a while that I had a hard time piecing it together, but I did find some other articles as well as a website created by a friend of Mitchel's that definitely helped, and this news coverage kind of helped to solidify everything. So anyway, according to this MSNBC segment, Mitchel's sister was concerned that he'd spent all his money, and she's like, okay, so then don't go to Summer Jam if you don't have any money to get there. I mean, I would assume the Weisers probably thought Mitchel and Bonnie might have tried to hitchhike now at this point if they didn't have any money. And of course, they're probably nervous about this because of the distance they need to travel to get to the concert. Like you said before, the not clientele, what's the word I'm looking for? The type of people who might also be hitchhiking towards this event. But like I said before, Mitchel seemed pretty dang determined and he wanted to go, so he was going to go.
I'm just a little confused because you have this kid that's quote-unquote gifted going to this super smarty pants school, and he hasn't even made it to his girlfriend and his $25 is already spent.
Yeah, I don't really know. I'm not sure. I mean, he's a 16-year-old kid. You gotta...
I know. I'm just saying, if mom was willing to give him money, how are you going to rush out of the house before you get the extra money?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Did Bonita have money, hopefully?
We'll get there.
All right.
Okay. Now, at some point on July 27th, 1973, Mitchel and Bonnie set out on their journey to Watkins Glen. It was reported that they had about $25 on them, were each wearing t-shirts and jeans, and carried their backpacks, sleeping bags, as well as a cardboard sign that had the words Watkins Glen written on it, which I'm assuming the sign was to help them in their hitchhiking journey.
Yes, I would assume so.
This is where I'm going. I have it written down, you know?
Right.
Also, I don't know how it was known about the $25. I can't tell if this was confirmed or if it was assumed, because Mitchel had that money on him when he traveled from his home to Camp Wilmette, but based on what his family said, he didn't have that money with him anymore as he'd spent it all on his transportation to get to Bonnie. So for all we know, it was Bonnie's money. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's what I was under the assumption of by what you said. I would assume that he had 25 to get to her, and maybe she had the extra 25 that they were going to use for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
But then how are you going to get back after you get home?
Hitchhike. It's free.
I guess. I mean, he could have hitchhiked there and saved $25 too.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he didn't like hitchhiking alone.
Maybe.
Maybe it felt like safer to do it with another person.
Yeah, buddy system.
Yeah. But anyway, the couple was said to be seen hitchhiking along State Route 97, which pretty much travels right along the Delaware River. And I do just want to mention what both Mitchel and Bonnie looked like in case a memory of them is jogged for anybody. So I do want to put that out there. This is just hearing, not visual. So Mitchel was described as 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed about 145 pounds. He had long brown hair that was parted in the middle, and he often wore it in a ponytail or pulled back in some fashion, and his eyes were brown. It was said that he was last seen wearing a t-shirt and jeans with boots, and it's also been mentioned that his top front teeth were slightly discolored and he had a scar on his lower lip. Mitchel also wore glasses. Bonnie was described as 4 feet 11 inches tall and approximately 90 pounds. She had dark, wavy brown hair and brown eyes and was last seen wearing a t-shirt and jeans. Now, something I discovered later once I watched the MSNBC segment on this case is that Bonnie's parents actually had no idea what she was doing that weekend. They were away on the Cape, and obviously we know that Bonnie was living at summer camp, and they hadn't heard anything about her plans to go to Summer Jam. But the weekend came and went, and Mitchel and Bonnie were supposed to be back home or back at camp on Sunday night, as the concert, I believe, was only a one-day thing on Saturday the 28th. But Mitchel didn't arrive home Sunday night, and Bonnie didn't arrive home or back to camp.
I would have assumed that Bonnie's parents would have had the same reaction as Larry's parents if they had found out that she was going to be going to Summer Jam.
It seems like no one wanted their kids to go to Summer Jam. I think that's like the general consensus here.
Well, at that age, too.
Yeah, definitely.
And how are you going to get there? Like, the whole travel portion, You don't have a lot of money, you're young kids, you're going to a place where, at a minimum, they'll be smoking weed at this point.
At a minimum, exactly.
Right, so...
Yeah, definitely.
Not the best place for juveniles.
No, definitely not. But due to Bonnie's parents not knowing that she should have been coming back home, or again, at the very least, back to camp, they didn't think anything of it. I mean, how would they? They wouldn't have known. It's reported in that MSNBC segment that on Tuesday, so this would have been July 31st at this point, Bonnie's parents had gotten home from the Cape and got a call that day. And they were asked if Bonnie was home, and they're like, what are you talking about? Isn't she supposed to be at camp? And that's how they found out, and when they found out, that their daughter was missing.
So they left the 26th?
Thursday.
And then she wasn't essentially noticed to be gone until Sunday?
Well, no. Mitchel left his home on the 26th, which was Thursday. They left sometime on the 27th, which was Friday.
The people at the camp didn't realize that she was gone until Sunday?
I believe so. Because I think they knew that she was going there.
Oh, okay. So they didn't make a big deal about it, but she probably said, hey, I'm going to be back on this day. And when she didn't return, that's why they called the parents.
Yes, exactly. And I had also seen it reported that the call might have been made on Monday as well. I'm not exactly sure which day, but regardless of the specific date, at this point, Bonnie's parents traveled to Camp Wellmet, I assume to confirm that she wasn't there, and then they reported their daughter missing. I'm not entirely sure of when, where, or how Mitchel was reported missing, but either way, the Sullivan County PD is who would be taking over the investigation from the start. But I really don't even think I should call this an investigation because there literally wasn't one.
So when you say there literally wasn't one, parents call, talk to authorities, they get the usual, oh, they'll be back, they're young kids, they were going to a concert type thing?
Yeah, so authorities were under the impression from the very beginning that these two young lovebirds were runaways and that Bonnie and Mitchel made this decision to leave and not come back. And due to the fact that it was initially believed that the couple had run off, at least in authorities' minds, there was nothing in the news and police were not taking it seriously. And that goes back to what I said earlier on in the episode with there being like no news coverage on this case for the first 7 months because that's all anybody thought. Like no one seemed to care. Outside of the family.
Right. But what I don't get is, obviously, hindsight, looking at what the investigators were thinking early on. If these two lovebirds wanted to run away, why would they make a plan that they were going to this concert?
Yeah,
Mitchel would have just ran away from home, taken his property, his belongings, whatever, went to Bonita, found her, and they would have just ran away.
Well, there's a lot more to this, so I see where you're coming from right now and like why you're thinking that, and I feel the same way, and I'm very curious. I feel like I say this in every episode, but I'm curious if we're going to end up in the same place with what we think here, but there are a lot of things that are going to sway your opinion both ways throughout this whole thing, and I think you're going to like feel ping-ponged, which is like a common thing that I say too, but I feel like you're going to go back and forth between what you think could have happened here, so...
I will say, with one of the images of the two kids that you showed me, they're in like this warm embrace. I could see from that picture, like if you had to pull like an emotion or an idea from that, and you're like, oh, these two disappeared together. They look together as two young kids that maybe their parents didn't want them to be together.
Very Romeo and Juliet-esque,
and they could have ran away.
But
just based on what you've said so far, it's like, They were going to this concert. They were going to be coming back.
Yeah.
Strange that that authorities would think that they're runaways off the bat.
I mean, it's 1973.
Man, being a cop in 73 must have been easy.
Well, I mean...
You didn't do anything.
It is true. It is true. And you can't, you definitely can't shit on all the police departments across the U.S. because we have heard of different cases, like Debbie Makel just popped into my head. She was in the 70s, and the response to her being missing was huge. Mm-hmm. So, no, it's not always the same, but you can tell, which departments cared and worked hard and, weren't completely and totally mismanaged versus the ones like this one where it's just a disaster from the very beginning.
That's fair. I think so. I think you're right with that. But it is, you get jaded when you hear all these stories.
Oh, absolutely.
Because obviously we cover mostly unsolved cases, and they're unsolved for a reason, and some of those reasons stem from, lack of investigation or poor police work.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Okay, so by February of 1974, there was some information finally reported on and some discussion around their case. But again, I still don't think, literally 7 months into them being missing, that authorities were going to do a damn thing about it. But there were initially rumors that the couple was maybe hiding out somewhere and that they just ran off to start this new life, kind of like we were just talking about. But by this time frame, February of 74, that didn't seem to be the predominant theory any longer, at least to family and friends. I did also see it mentioned that there was a concern that the two could have joined a cult. That was a big thing back in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of young kids were getting wrapped up in that world.
Yes, and also if you think young, highly gifted children, so from an academic standpoint, may not be street smart, then you have them, if they even got to the concert, going to this concert where drugs are definitely going to be being used and abused, easily influenced because of their age, get pulled into, a roadie's van, with the peace signs and everything, the hippie van or whatever, and they fall into that, love of, oh, just do whatever you want, man, we'll just travel the world, man, or
you have this charismatic leader who, totally just mesmerizes them and they just get sucked into it. I mean, we hear about it all the time, and I don't think it has anything to do with how smart somebody is. I think it has to do with how manipulative those charismatic leaders are.
Well, I think it's funny that we got onto this topic with the cults and stuff after listening to our new friend LA Not So Confidential's podcast on multi-level marketing schemes.
Yes.
And how they're kind of similar to cults in the respect of that charismatic leader wanting to give you something in your life that you don't necessarily have.
That's fulfilling.
Right? I mean, young kids are an easy target.
Yeah.
Especially when drugs are involved. Who knows?
I will say, over time, it doesn't seem like there was anything ever found to really solidify the idea that they may have joined a cult, but I can totally see why that was a part of the thought process early on in this case.
Yeah, I think it's fair to throw that around.
Absolutely.
Especially if there's anything in that area at the time.
It seemed like there was everything in every area at that time.
Very true.
Now, in mid-February of 74, students at John Dewey High School, remember, the school Bonnie and Mitchell attended, had put together a sort of fundraiser type thing to raise money to put towards a search for the missing teens. It was a really sweet idea, and it also took place around Valentine's Day, so they were selling all sorts of Valentine's type things like cards, candies, pastries, heart-shaped things, etc. And they called it the Have a Heart Committee. And within a very short span of time, literally just days, this committee already earned more than $525 from their sales, which today would equal around $3,500, which they plan to donate to an organization called Tracers. And I can't really find much online about Tracers, so I'm not exactly sure what they specialized in, but from what I've inferred, I believe they were an organization that helped to find missing people.
Makes sense.
Yes. Tracing people. Tracers.
I just think, when I hear Tracers, I think sci-fi movie.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. You should have seen me trying to look this up online. The most bizarre things were coming up. I was like, this is not the organization I am looking for, I think.
I guess they're not around anymore then.
Probably not, no. But unfortunately, I can't quite tell if a search for Mitchell and Bonnie was ever done, but nearly $700 or $4,600 today had been raised in those fundraising efforts. So that could have been huge. But
yeah, that's a lot of money for high school kids to be
seriously
gathering up too.
They had a freaking chairperson, they had everything. They set up this whole committee. They were not messing around. So it was really nice to see their community come together. So you had their friends all banding together to try and find them, same with their family. And then you have the police that like are just sitting like, oh, well, whatever, they'll come back. Like, fucking really?
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Were both of the sisters younger?
No, I believe Mitchell's sister was older. I am not entirely sure about Bonnie's.
Okay.
Now, I had mentioned that the theory of the two having run off wasn't really the predominant belief anymore, at least by February of 74, because at this point it had been so long since the two went missing. But in terms of what those close to the couple believed could have happened at this point, I don't think really anyone knew or had an idea, and most close to them had a hard time deciphering what they thought could have happened. And I will say there are a lot of things I'm going to reveal to you as we keep going that probably made it harder for those involved in the case or that were close to Mitchell and Bonnie to kind of land on a theory. And again, John, like I mentioned to you before, it's like what I was just saying about how I think you're going to go back and forth like, oh my God, could they have done this? Could they have not? I'm not sure.
Were there multiple agencies involved? Because you had Mitchell, who essentially went missing from home because that's where he was last seen. And then you have Bonnie, who went missing from camp, which was hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, it was about 100-ish miles from her home. So, yes, and I actually touch on this later, but we could talk about it now. There were going to be two agencies involved. It was the Sullivan County PD, and they were the original one, who I believe was maybe in charge of where Camp Wilmette was, and then the NYPD.
Okay.
So that would be more state police, wouldn't it?
Well, no. NYPD is New York City Police.
So why isn't it NYCPD?
I don't know. I think NYPD is just so big.
Yeah, that's also true.
That it's just NYPD. It's New York Police, but...
Yeah, well, so... And the thing about that, too, is that Brooklyn...
Right, which was a big part of New York City.
Yeah, exactly. And then Borough Park, I don't think it was too far from there where Bonnie was living, at least when she wasn't at camp. So, I mean, it makes sense that you're taking the department that is near their home and then the department that is near technically the last place that they were seen, which was, like we said, State Route 97, Camp Wilmette, Narrowsburg area. So that's why you would have the two agencies. But again, even though there are two, neither are doing anything.
Which is strange because you got to assume, like, at least nowadays, you know, NYPD has tons of resources at their availability.
Yeah.
So even back then, I would assume that they were probably more progressed as far as their infrastructure goes than like a smaller town police.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the sticking point is the fact that there wasn't just one agency that was neglecting this, there were two.
I wonder if they talked to each other and they convinced each other.
Well, it's interesting you say that because that comes up later too, where
there was no communication.
They didn't think there was. Like family, friends, nobody believed that there was any communication with them. And if it was not like conducive to actually getting anything done.
Well, that's what I was going to get at. I wonder if, you know, one detective from each different agency talked to each other and saying, hey, you know, I have these two people gone missing. Oh, same story here. And they both convinced each other
that there was
like,
nothing.
Oh, it's probably a runaway type thing. And they kind of convinced themselves of it.
Yeah. Also, you just saying type thing made me realize that I say type thing a lot now. So thanks a lot for that one.
well, you know, it's a type thing.
It is a type thing. So one of Mitchell and Bonnie's classmates, who was actually the chairperson for this Have-A-Heart committee I mentioned, was interviewed about his missing friends, and the following was stated by said student for the Daily News. Quote, "For most students, it's just a big mystery that they can't figure out. Both liked their families and their friends. They wouldn't run off like this. And it's most unlikely they became involved in dope. They weren't that kind." End quote.
I don't know. They could not be that kind and still get peer pressured into it. Or fucking secondhand high.
This is true. I have been there. It is very true.
If you're talking about, you know, the next Woodstock, you know, everybody's getting fucking high over there. So it could just be in the air and having no tolerance, being a kid that had nothing to do with that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Walking through, easy to get pulled into it. Then your inhibitions are lowered. And then
makes me think about walking through a casino that you can smoke in. And it's just like you have that like smoke in the air.
Yeah.
Like I bet that's what it was like there. Like if you got to Summer Jam and you pulled up, I'm assuming it was in like a big massive field and it's just like the air is just like soaked with marijuana.
I wouldn't doubt it. Or at least there were definitely pockets of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a couple months later, a few more tidbits of information were released, this time regarding what the family was doing to try and find their missing loved ones, because as we already know, the cops weren't really doing anything about it. So from what I've inferred based on what I've read, I think pretty much all of the stuff that was uncovered was from the families of both Mitchell and Bonnie. It's also reported that their families had put out an ad in local papers pleading with their kids, which stated, quote, "Bonnie and Mitchell, please call home. Your parents are frantic with worry," end quote.
That sounds like they're getting brainwashed into thinking that they ran away now, too.
Well, so like I said, there are things that are going to come out as we keep talking that might make you believe the same thing. But over time, that might change. That might get more solidified for you. So with this case, there's just so many things that you're going to learn. And you're just going to be like, WTF, because that's what I felt like when I was researching this.
All right, well, I'm ready to get to learning.
Okay. So also, the Weisers and the Bickwits also mailed out thousands of flyers about the two and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance.
Are the families friendly? Like, did they know each other as the two were dating and stuff like that?
It seemed like it. I don't know if they were, like, friends per se, but they did not seem to have any issues with each other, and they seemed to be working well together in terms of trying to find their kids. So I think...
Not like one trying to blame the other one, like,
no.
Oh, your son brought my daughter to summer jam type thing.
No, I haven't seen any of that at all. It seemed very amicable.
Okay.
Also reported around this time was that there were a few leads the family had uncovered themselves. Their parents believed there was the potential that Mitchell and Bonnie could have been on a reservation in South Dakota due to a letter that I believe the Bickwit family had gotten the year before, so meaning 1973, but after the two had vanished. The context of this whole situation is that Mitchell and Bonnie were into or interested in Native American affairs, and this reservation had sent this letter to the Bickwits' home and obviously had their address, so they considered this as a potential option.
I'm just smirking because I could see that as well. Like, just looking at these two in the pictures that you've showed, I could see them
being interested in that, wanting to maybe immerse themselves in that world. Like, there are so many things that...
Being on a reservation is like cut off from the rest of the world, essentially, unless you want to be found.
This is true, as unfortunate as it is, that it's cut off from the world. Like,
I say cut off from the world in the respect that, you know, the saying, like, what happens on the reservation stays on the reservation.
Yeah.
It's like outside PDs aren't coming in and doing a deep dive investigation into looking for these kids, because if they talk to the people that, you know, police the reservation and they're like, no, we haven't seen anybody, they're pretty much like held
hands
at
off.
bay.
Yeah.
So
if Yellowstone is any sort of depiction of what that's like,
right.
I mean, I can see that.
Yeah. So that would be if they had ran away or something and they enjoyed this culture and stuff.
Yep. And also the weirdness is like, okay, well, why are they getting this letter now mailed to them? It had nothing to do with Bonnie or Mitchell or anything, but it's from this reservation that I don't think either of their families had ever heard of. How do they have the address? They're just thinking, you know, could this be a lead to look into?
Yeah. I mean, both of the kids enjoyed that culture. You're getting this random letter, like a reservation sending out letters to Jewish families in New York.
Yeah, it's very strange. No. So I can totally see why they were like, okay, why are we getting this? I think we should look into it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even though it's a letter that maybe didn't have like context to say, hey, Mom, it's Bonnie. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all she could get out. Maybe she felt like she was trapped there.
Well, I don't. So that's the thing. Like the way that it says letter, I don't know if it was addressed to the family either, but.
I'm picturing like a postcard.
Yeah, I
not
could
like
see
a
that.
Postcard like Grand Canyon, but at a reservation type thing. But I mean like some type of mail item that is just showing where it came from. Yeah,
I don't think there was anything written on it to say or to indicate in any way that it had to do with Bonnie or Mitchell, but it just had to do with this reservation, and it was just weird that they had the address that they were even getting something in the first place. Also, South Dakota, like most obscure state it seems, you know.
Far away too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like but we're talking like thousands of miles at that point.
Oh, for sure. But unfortunately, it seems as though this lead didn't really pan out after further investigation, and it didn't seem like either of them were actually on this reservation in South Dakota. There had also supposedly been a situation with a strange phone call that had been made that was charged to the Bickwits' phone bill. It's reported in an April 10th, 1974 article, quote, "Or the month last fall when the Bickwits had a mysterious phone call to Indiana charged to their bill. Perhaps Bonnie had made the phone call to a friend," Mrs. Bickwit reasoned. But the phone company decided the billing was an error and canceled the charge, end quote.
I'm lost on that one.
So lost.
How do you charge a phone call to somebody else's bill without being there and calling from the line?
I have no idea, but I have a feeling it has something to do with the way phones worked like back in the day.
I don't know. That's before my time, too.
Yeah,
Even before my time.
Seriously. I was very confused by it, but also, let's just say that you could like charge a phone call from, say, a payphone. Maybe that's what it was.
I was thinking more along the lines of like call and collect.
Yeah.
Like if I were to call you collect and you accept the charges.
Yes.
It gets charged to you. So maybe
that's
daughter,
what it was.
Maybe not one of the parents. Maybe the daughter accepted the call and got charged that way. So maybe somebody was calling from Indiana.
Yeah.
Collect.
Well, I also wonder, though, like, could you use a payphone back in the day and say you didn't have enough money to continue your call or whatever and be like, can you charge it to this phone bill?
I don't think so. I think that's why it's a payphone, not a request to charge my other phone bill phone.
Okay, I was just trying to think of something, but your reasoning makes sense. But either way, this potentially good lead also led nowhere. I really don't know what it means. If there's anybody out there that knows how, like, payphones or charging to another person's bill or something work back in the day, I would love to know about that. So if you could reach out to us and tell me, I would be so thrilled. There were also 3 separate sightings of Mitchel and Bonnie that were reported in 1974. First was from a pharmacist that believed he'd filled a prescription for Bonnie at some point. It's not really clear when or where, but this sighting didn't produce anything, and it didn't seem like this person that he filled the prescription for was even Bonnie to begin with.
Do we know from Bonnie's parents whether or not she would have had a prescription to fill, like some type of medication she was taking?
Not that I know of. I haven't seen anything about that, but for all we know, she could have, but either way, the sighting didn't pan out. Regardless.
You would have assumed that if she did,
yes,
her parents probably would have clung to that and
absolutely
move forward with trying to look into it.
Yeah, for sure. Another sighting of the couple came from 2 women who stated they'd seen them in August of 1973, which was technically within days of when they disappeared, and they were supposedly seen on a bus traveling from Boston, Massachusetts to Dover, New Hampshire. However, yet again, there was no further info on this sighting, and it was never confirmed as being Mitchel and Bonnie.
Where was Summer Jam taking place?
It was in Watkins Glen, New York.
So, I mean, that makes no sense. You'd be going from New York to Boston to New Hampshire?
Yeah, no.
It'd be faster to go from New York to New Hampshire, don't you think? Because you're essentially creating a triangle of travel.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was one good concrete sighting that, as of today, has been said to be the very last confirmed sighting of Mitchel and Bonnie. It's reported that a truck driver was the last person to have seen them, and he gave them a ride towards their destination, but it's unclear if they ever did make it up to Watkins Glen, because this truck driver didn't drop them off all that far from their starting point. And the weird thing, and it's why I was so hung up on the location of the camp in the beginning, is that it's been stated that this truck driver dropped them off in Narrowsburg, which is the same town where Camp Wellmet was, where Bonnie worked.
Very strange.
Yeah, my only thought on that is that he probably stopped and picked them up outside the camp, because I have seen it reported that it was an area that was easy to hitchhike from, but then he probably couldn't drive them any further, maybe depending on where he was going, so he dropped them off a few miles into town?
Possibly, but I mean, you think like a long-haul trucker.
Mm-hmm.
Was Camp Wellmet off of 97?
Yes.
So
I was going to get to that in a minute, which I'll just tell you now. So
that's why it was easy to hitchhike from?
Yes, but also I think the way it was described, if I'm remembering correctly, in the MSNBC segment that covered this case, was that it was almost like as soon as you got out of the camp, it was like this little towny type area, and it was just easy. Like there were always people traveling through, so I think it was just easy to throw up your thumb and somebody would just be like, oh, I'll take you wherever. So that's kind of why I was thinking maybe he just dropped them off further into town. But again, it just goes back to what I was saying before. Was Camp Wellmet actually in Narrowsburg? On their website, they have a couple different locations, it looks like. But again, I don't know what it was like back in 73.
Yeah.
So like if it expanded over time or things like that. But
it's just weird that a trucker would stop to pick somebody up that's holding a sign saying where they're going and only transport them a super short distance.
Yeah, I wonder if he was just trying to help him out and be like, hey, I can get you a portion of the way there.
Yeah, I was going to say it's still faster than walking.
Yeah,
so if he transported them 3 miles, it's still faster than them walking.
For sure. Also, what we were talking about before about State Route 97, I also think that being one of the last sightings of them as well, I think that he probably dropped them off there, is what I'm gathering from it. So if they're considering that this truck driver's sighting of them is good, it's legit, it's confirmed, then if they are also confirming that they were last seen on Route 97, I would have to assume that he dropped them off at that location on Route 97.
Right.
And then that's where all of that info came from.
Right, because if he dropped them off in Joe Schmoville,
yeah,
last sighting would be in Joe Schmoville.
Yes, I like that town name. But at the end of the day, I will say this guy, it seems like he was vetted. It seemed like authorities looked into him, whether that was now or way later, whenever it came out. I think his story's pretty legit. It's all I've ever heard as like the last confirmed sighting. So the only thing that's unfortunate and frustrating is, again, even though we now have this confirmed sighting, it's still not clear if they actually made it to Watkins Glen.
Right. We only know that they made it a little way away from...
Yeah, like 3 miles or something. Like it's not that far in their journey. So You're only getting this tiny little snippet and you have so much of the timeline missing.
100 plus miles.
Exactly, yes. Now, as we keep going, I just want to let you know that there's going to be some talk about psychics in this episode. And of course, with the Weiser and Bickwit families having to shoulder the responsibility of this investigation, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they were going to reach out to psychics. They were desperate. I can totally understand why. And it goes back to that 70s, 80s mindset, the feelings on psychics. I think it was just different back then, so.
I mean, even nowadays.
Yeah.
When you and I have children. When they're teens, God forbid if they went missing and we were in this position, you'd use every avenue possible.
Oh, for sure.
Even though we feel like
I'm over here as a skeptic, yeah,
right.
But I've never seen it work for myself or in these cases that we cover. So
nor do I want to have a psychic tell me what's going on.
Yeah, I don't want to know anything. Like when people are like, "Oh, I want to get my palm read," or "I want like a tarot reading," anything. I'm like, I want to live my life surprised. Like I don't want to know that I'm potentially going to die in 6 months or something horrifying.
Right. Tell everyone your favorite quote from The Matrix after you finally watched it.
Ignorance is bliss.
Exactly. That, at least in form of psychics. Like, if they really have powers, I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know anything about my future.
Yep, I completely agree. Live my life and be surprised by what happens. But anyway, at the end of the day, to me at least, it seems like the psychics that have attempted to get involved in this case were the type we hear about all too often. The type who take advantage of struggling families. And I also want to mention that I'm not entirely sure if this is the same psychic that's going to be discussed later, as I couldn't find this person's name, but just based on what I've read, I'm relatively confident it's a different person. So let me give you the rundown on the first psychic we'll touch on in this episode.
The first?
Yes, I said psychics.
I must have missed the S.
Yeah. So this psychic was located in Glen Head, New York, and had a location called Mind Control.
I'm already out.
Yeah, I was literally thinking the same thing. According to reporting done on this case, supposedly after touching a piece of Mitchel's clothing, the psychic told the Weiser family that he, quote, sensed illness around the ears and throat, end quote. Mitchel's mom stated, quote, I was very impressed because the last time Mitchel had worn that shirt, he had been sick with a sore throat, end quote.
I thought you were going to point at me and say, ear, nose, and throat, ear, nose, and throat.
No. But I can see why she would have hope there. That is something that, how would this guy have ever known that? Sure, could he have been guessing? Of course, but...
I mean, that could be coincidences, though. Like,
of course they could, yeah.
The reason I said, I thought you were going to point at me and say ear, nose, and throat, because ear tubes as a kid, you know,
it's like a chronic thing that you always get sick with, yeah.
Right, so... It could have been, he was aiming at that, being like, oh, this is a thing to tie to your son. She could have been like, searching, oh, my son had tubes in his ears as a baby.
Yeah.
Or in particular, it was like, oh, the last time he wore this shirt, he was sick with something. It's like a generality that they throw out.
Yeah.
That you attach to certain things to affirm their suspicions.
Yes, makes perfect sense. Now, the following was reported in the Fort Lauderdale News about what the psychic said they were able to see, and also how things panned out after that. Quote, he said he could feel they were in a cold area, perhaps Vermont or New Hampshire, and he saw Bonnie limping. He also asked if he could have some of their letters. He was going to sleep on them that night and get in touch with us. That was in December, and we haven't heard from him since, end quote.
Sleep on them like
physically?
Through osmosis? Like...
I don't think so.
Or read them and think about it.
I think that's more so what he meant.
Okay.
But either way, do you remember the time frame that I told you this article was reported?
I think so.
April.
Yep. And December. So we're talking almost a whole year.
4 months. That's 4 months.
April to December?
December to April.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So
4 months.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to take these letters. I'm going to look at them.
On them.
Yeah. I'm going to think about this. And then nothing. He just freaking ghosted this family. Like, F that guy.
Well, when you think of a cold place
to
go back with something else that was like a weird piece of evidence, South Dakota is pretty fucking cold.
I've never been, so I wouldn't know.
South Dakota, North Dakota, like Utah, that whole area, that's like...
This is true, yeah.
That's, flyover state, gets cold, nothing there.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So, now, as of April 1974, there were practically no leads and no new ones to be worked either. Regardless of all the sightings not panning out and the psychic giving them the runaround, both the Weiser and Bickwit families still had hope that their kids were still alive. Now, as we move forward, there is some additional information I need to tell you that's released over time, and those are possible clues that could have contributed to the early belief that the couple ran away. Remember I was telling you about that before? How there are going to be things that might make you believe that, but might also change your mind.
I don't know. I feel like the more I'm listening and learning, the more I'm thinking, maybe not set out to run away, but maybe it manifested and it happened as they were on their journey.
Okay, well, listen to these few things. First of all, when I first started digging into this case, something I thought was interesting that had been stated a lot regarding the couple and how their demeanor was before they disappeared was that they were described as, quote, ill at ease before they left. And I truly had no idea what this term meant.
I would have thought like anxious.
Well, okay, so you're
ill
close.
At ease is like, I'm reading Edgar Allan Poe poem. Like the Telltale Heart.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying, but you're close. It means uncomfortable or embarrassed.
Yeah, okay. That's more along the lines of like when you hear a word and you feel it.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
If you're ill at ease, it's like ill at ease is like the old English way of saying uneasy.
Yes, absolutely.
Uneasy or anxious or,
Yeah. Well, so obviously at first I'm like, ill at ease. Like, why are they describing them this way? Like, what does this mean? So upon further research, there was some stuff that I found that lends credence to this description of them. So let's start with Mitchel. The big thing for him that I saw reported was that he apparently wasn't going to be able to attend a specific college he wanted to go to. The school was out of town and was either expensive or at least out of his family's price range to be able to afford. So he was told at some point before he vanished that he wasn't going to be able to go and would have to settle on another college. Mitchel's sister believes her brother was, quote, out of sorts and thinks that him not being able to go to the school he wanted to go to might have contributed to that.
You're this gifted student, you know how smart you are, and then you have your mind set on going to this particular school. You work your butt off in order to get into it, and then it's like the rug is pulled out from underneath you.
Yeah, definitely. I can see why he would be upset.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's move on to Bonnie. There's a few more things for Bonnie. It seemed like there was just the one big one for Mitchel. There could have been other things. I'm not exactly sure, but there seems to be more with Bonnie. She was said to be frustrated with work and wasn't having a great time working at Camp Wellmet. Later, when Bonnie's sister Cheryl was interviewed for MSNBC, she said that Bonnie was very unhappy at her job. And she went on to explain that Bonnie believed she was being, and her word, exploited, with her working these crazy long days and hours.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, she was 15.
Right.
She's young.
What did she do at Camp Wellmet, though?
I told you she was a mother's helper.
Oh, that's where she was learning to be that?
Well, she was doing that there.
You're at a camp and you're a mother's helper? Like, are there women with families at Camp Wellmet? I don't understand.
There must have been.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's
strange,
kind of a strange setup, but yeah.
Also, you want to think, like, if she's a highly intellectual person, to essentially be, like, learning to be a housewife.
Yeah, that could
be something that's like, I don't want to do that. I want to be
an engineer,
right?
Yeah.
Because you had Mitchel following a passion of photography, And then she's like, oh, I got to go be like a glorified babysitter or a au pair.
Yeah. I can totally see what you're saying. Maybe that's just not what she wanted for herself. And that could lend credence to, again, her being very unhappy there.
Well, you think now you have Mitchell being unhappy that he's not going to get into the college that he wants to get into.
Mm-hmm.
So his future is not what he wants it to be.
Yep.
Then you have Bonnie, her future or her present was not what she wanted it to be. So she could have feared for her future.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all good ways to think about it.
So now the runaway thing seems
a little more plausible.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So what else was eating at Bonnie?
So there was something I didn't tell you earlier that also happened before Bonnie left Camp Wilmette for Watkins Glen, and that was that she asked her boss for the night or the weekend off so she could travel up to the concert with Mitchell, and her boss told her no. And in response, she just up and quit her job and left anyway.
Well, that's weird because I had asked earlier about how it went so long without her being reported missing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know that she asked to go, so somebody did know, and she was denied the opportunity to do so. So wouldn't you think that her boss, if her boss was like such a stickler that she said no, that she'd be like blowing up her parents or making a stink about it?
Well, her parents were away on the Cape. How could the boss have gotten in touch? So for all we know, maybe they did. But listen to this. So it was further clarified and discussed in an article in the Jewish Week. And just for context, before I read the quote to you, the individual referred to as, I believe it's pronounced Kagan, is Bonnie's sister, Cheryl, so her last name. The piece stated, quote, Kagan says Bonnie was having trouble with the family she was babysitting for at Wilmette. Kagan says Bonnie asked for the night off when Mitchell came up, but her employers refused. She quit in anger. Bonnie told her employer, Charles Shane, she would come back after the concert to pick up her clothes and paycheck, Kagan says. She is bitter that Shane and the camp allowed an underage employee to leave on her own. It's beyond belief, Kagan says. They had no business letting her go. They were responsible for a minor, end quote.
Beyond belief. I like that.
Yep.
It's a different way of saying mind-boggling.
Yes, that is the term of the year, so maybe it's going to be this one now.
Beyond belief.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy.
And so I wonder, sorry to cut you off, but what I was wondering with that quote has to do with the fact that you were just saying, oh, wouldn't the boss be blowing the family up and trying to get in touch with them, calling over and over? But if they now knew, oh, she's just going to come back after to pick up her paycheck,
right?
Maybe
quit.
That's where the concern. Yeah, they're like, oh, well, this girl just quit in anger. This is ridiculous. I can't believe she'd do that. They were probably annoyed too.
It's not like they said no. She was like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Assuming she was going to be there the next day, and then she didn't show up.
Yeah,
she was like, all right, fuck this, I'm out.
Yep.
So
again, that's another thing. Like, could she have made an impulsive decision maybe while they were in their travels that could lend to the idea of them maybe running away?
Well, she's already leaving on bad terms. She's pissed off.
Absolutely.
She wasn't happy doing the job that she was doing. And then she asked to go and take some time off, and she's denied.
Yeah. So you can probably tell already
so she's like,
why
I want to get out of this place.
Yeah, you can tell why she didn't like these people, or not that she didn't like them or just didn't enjoy working for them, because it seems like they were a little harsh. I mean,
right. And
you're
then
at camp, it's a weekend. Like, you can't watch your own kids.
Right.
Like, I know that's kind of rude of me to say, but.
And then you have, these are two teen lovers.
Mm-hmm.
They're both unhappy. She's especially unhappy. Let's just throw this idea out and say, let's just get out of here.
Yeah. I can see it.
I can see it too. Maybe police weren't that far off then. If they knew some of this stuff going into it.
But at the end of the day, you should still have an investigation. You should still be searching for them. You should still be talking to people, trying to get more information. As much as we're honest about police, I'm not going to give these guys any benefit of the doubt here. They did shit. They did nothing.
I'm not saying give them the benefit of the doubt. But I'm saying if they talked to these people and they knew what we know now, it's fair to come to the conclusion that, okay, runaway is a possibility. Do you stop there? No. You continue and you try to find them. But if they gathered this much information and that's the conclusion that they came to, okay, it was wrong to cut off the investigation, but they could have been on the right track.
Yes. And the other thing is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we keep going as well, but I said it before too, the family also did believe in the early days that they could have run off as well. So a lot of the things that I'm telling you now are things that obviously all happened right around the initial time frame that they went missing.
And those things informed that decision making.
Yes, absolutely. But again, there's going to be more that comes out later that might make you completely flip and be like, wait, hold on. I don't believe anything I believed before.
I already feel ping-ponged, like you said.
Something else that happened prior to the couple's trip up to Watkins Glen was that Bonnie had actually traveled back home roughly a week-ish before she disappeared. And it was said that she sneaked out of camp to make this trek back home. And remember, it's like a fair distance from her house, so I'm not sure how she got there. I can only assume she probably hitchhiked. But it was stated that she came home and took $80 from her savings. And that money she'd been saving was supposed to be for a new bike. Neighbors had apparently seen her as she snuck into the house, even though her family wasn't home. So that's like how they knew she did it. And let's also think about this. $80 back in 73 is $533 today.
Fucking inflation, man.
For real. But just based on everything else, as well as the fact that she's now grabbing this money, what was she grabbing it for? Maybe to
a getaway
leave?
Or... Well, so $80 from her savings. Did she have more than $80 in savings, or was that all of it?
Not sure. I would like to know that, though.
Right, because if she was running away, she would take all of it.
All of her money, exactly. However, her paycheck, she never picked that up at work.
Oh.
So also you're thinking, she said she was coming back. This is what I mean about being ping-ponged. So she said she was going to come back. She left her paycheck there, and now she only took $80. Was it all of the $80? I think there are other things that could go into this that could make you go either way.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm not that thrown the other way by saying that she never came back to pick up her paycheck. She couldn't be like, I quit right now, pay me.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so there was one very interesting thing that I learned once I watched the MSNBC segment on this case. And I feel like I'm just going to talk about this 100,000 times because I learned so much from it. But Bonnie's parents had apparently received a letter that she'd written 3 days prior to her disappearance. I don't know if she mailed it to them, if she left it at camp, or how they got it, I'm not sure. But either way, some of what's in the note could be very telling. And I want to play 2 clips from the MSNBC video for you now so you can actually hear Bonnie's mother reading this letter.
The Bickwits received a letter Bonnie had written just 3 days before leaving for the concert. It only strengthened the theory that the couple had run off.
Dear Mom and Dad, I love you both very much. Up here, I have my independence. If on my time off, I feel as though I want to get up and leave, and it is physically possible for me to do so, I do it. I don't have to tell anyone if I don't want to. I really want for you to allow me to, and not mind my traveling and doing things. After reading the letter, I felt, well, she'll be gone for the summer and come back certainly the end of the summer and back to school again.
Bonnie's mother is still haunted by her daughter's last letter.
I love you both very, very much. And it's for that reason that I'm able to write such an intense letter to you. Thanks. Thanks for being the people you are. Love always. Bonnie.
First of all, I just want to say that is like the most heartbreaking thing ever to hear her mother cry like that. But I think the common sentiment there is that her mom even said that after she read this, she thought that Bonnie did decide to leave and that she just hoped she'd come back by the summer, specifically because she'd have to go back to school in the fall.
Yeah, it seemed like from the first clip, while I'm up here and I'm not working, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, she has her independence, that word.
Right. I want you to allow me or afford me the same independence at home that I have while I'm working here.
Yeah.
And then, yes, like at the end when her mother's crying, I think that obviously she's already been going through hell.
Yep.
But then to read those words, like, thank you for being who you are, blah, blah, blah. And because you are the people that you are, that allows me to write these things.
Yeah. And be honest with you, too. To be that honest with your parents. I mean, back in the 70s, I feel like that was not as common as it is today.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, neither of us were alive back then. So
yeah. And you have to think, too, this was like, I believe, I can't completely pin down exactly when this segment was released, but I'm 99% sure it was in the year 2000. You have to think that's 27 years later. So to read those words and to remember what your daughter had said to you, all that had to be just awful.
Yeah, it's opening up an old wound many years later.
Yeah. So obviously with all this information, you have Bonnie going back home to take the $80. You have this letter. You have her quitting her job in anger, the fact that she wasn't happy. Police, of course, with all this information up front. I mean, like you were saying before, John, it could be why they were classifying them as just runaways. But of course, after now 7 months, 9 months, 10 months, a year of them not coming home, never hearing from them, the family's like, no way. They didn't run away. I can see why you believed it in the beginning. All of these things make sense. But at this point now, these kids would have reached back out to us, yet detectives still weren't doing anything. Nothing.
Yeah, I can understand where the family's coming from. In regards to that letter, I haven't heard the entirety of the letter.
It seemed like it was a long letter based on the video.
Yeah, it was like a page and a quarter, probably.
Yeah.
It seemed from that letter, if I had to say whether or not these kids ran away, strictly based off that writing, it seemed like they might be taking a small sabbatical from everyday life.
Yeah.
But would come back.
And that's exactly what Bonnie's mom believed. She said, I think she might have just been gone for the summer, and then she'd come back for school in the fall.
Right.
And then when they didn't, wouldn't you think that alarm bells would be going off?
Right.
Obviously, it was for the family. That's when they get the psychic involved and all these other people. And you still have police saying, nah, they're runaways.
Yeah.
Once everyone's like, no, there's more here. They just they're like poo-pooing it. They're like, screw this case.
Poo-pooing it?
Yeah.
Poo-pooing it?
Yeah, you never heard of that?
So this letter was dated a few days prior to her leaving
I believe so.
camp to go on this adventure with her boyfriend.
Yes, I believe so. And like I said, I have no idea how the family received this letter, if it was mailed or what.
So I'm thinking perhaps this was how she felt prior to asking for the time off.
Oh, maybe.
So in this letter, it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to leave, but I'm going to come back.
Yeah.
And then you have her asking her employer, hey, can I take the day off, or can I take the weekend off, or whatever? And that sending her over the edge when she's refused. And it's like, I was willing to leave and come back, but now I'm just so fed up with what life appears to be like. Like, am I going to be working for people that tell me what to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
You know, I could see her being sent over the edge, whereas she was like going to come back at one point, and now
she's like screw it, I don't want to. Yeah, I can see that too. But Bonnie's mother said of her attempts to try and get authorities involved, quote, I went to the town of Monticello. Their attitude was, they are away for the summer and they will come back. They dismissed it, end quote. So that just goes back to the same thing. It's like they are pushing, they are trying, they are doing everything that they can for all these different agencies to get involved. And this is when I was going to bring up too, that there was NYPD, Sullivan County PD. She's going to this other town, and still they're completely dismissing them.
Right. And they have obligations.
Of course they do. At the end of the
jobs.
day. Yes.
They both have jobs. So it's like to just up and leave and never show back up to work. And these seem like they're studious kids. Not the type to just up and leave their obligations, but who knows?
And I can see the initial mindset to say, maybe they'll come back after the summer. But then after that didn't happen, once they are reaching back out to you, once this family is pushing, once they're coming forward with leads that they've uncovered, why are you not stepping in and saying, okay, let us do, even if it's not like using all your resources and all these things that you have at your disposal, even if you put out an APB or whatever it was back in 73, I don't know if that existed back then, but you put out something to say, hey, these kids are missing.
Right.
Rather than just saying, nah, this is what we think. You as a family know nothing. Move along now. Like, right. It's so fucked.
Even back in the day with systems not being nearly as significant as they are now, you call neighboring agencies, you definitely have direct lines to them, and you just say, hey, put this out to your officers, put this out to your officers, put this out to your officers, and let them know, keep an eye out for them. But to be just totally dismissed and be like, yeah, no, we're not going to do anything, you're wrong. It's just got to be the worst feeling when, you know, you're already filled with so much dread, like, where are my kids?
Yeah, honestly. So even with their attempts to get authorities working on the case again, we know that it was just ignored. That is obviously in the 70s and the 80s. But an individual by the name of Eric Greenberg got involved in Mitchel and Bonnie's case in, I believe, the 90s. He was a reporter, and I did see it on the Mitchel and Bonnie dedicated official website that was created by a friend of theirs, that he got involved sometime around 1994, but he went on to write an article for the Jewish Week in 1998, which seemed like it kind of blew things wide open. It shone some light on the case, talked about what had happened since they'd gone missing in 1973 to now in 1998, what had gone on in the investigation, or lack thereof, and there's a lot that comes out from this point on, because this case finally got the attention it deserved from 1998 through the early 2000s.
Did he go to school with them? Could he have known them growing up or heard of the story growing up?
I don't believe so. He looked relatively young. He's actually in the MSNBC video.
Oh, okay.
And he looked, I would say maybe, and I apologize if I'm so wrong on this, but probably in his 30s. Mm-hmm. So you would think that he would have been really young back in 73 if that were the case. So I don't think so, but I'm not positive. Mm-hmm. Greenberg seemed to uncover a plethora of information from the police department. And no, it is not in a good light for the detectives on this case. But he also brought a lot of attention back to Mitchel and Bonnie's disappearance after he'd gotten involved, and that was very needed. So, for starters, not only did authorities pretty much ignore the case from the very beginning, like I have said 1,000 times already in this episode, but it was also completely mishandled. Greenberg's article in the Jewish Week stated, quote, "It's a scandal," admits New York City Police Lieutenant Philip Mahoney, recently appointed commanding officer of the Missing Persons Squad. Mahoney, who attended the Watkins Glen concert as a teenager 25 years ago, says that unit was mismanaged for years. He said files on the Bickwit and Weiser cases cannot even be found today, even though it should be an active case. It's an embarrassment for us. Next week, we'll look further into Greenberg's reporting, the blunders made by police during the early days of the investigation, as well as additional leads that made their way to authorities after this case finally received traction in the media. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.